As I say, welcome to our first formal LEP board meeting since February, and our first one in this remote way. I know we had a conference call back in the 1st of April, but a lot has happened. As I said a moment or two ago, subject, without trying to stifle any of the discussion and conversation, it is my intention that we will conclude matters on or before about 4 o'clock. We're waiting for Councillors Blake and Jeffries to join us, and hopefully they will shortly. I'm not aware of any significant apologies other than perhaps not formally from Harrogate, because we hadn't heard from either Councillor Cooper or Councillor Swift as to whether they would join us. Oh, I think Councillor Cooper has joined us. I've just seen
him. He has, yes.
Ah, yes. Richard, forgive me. Welcome, of course.
Thank you.
And welcome to Councillor De Goin from York, and obviously all our other colleagues. There are some housekeeping things which I'll go through in a moment, but just to set some context, a lot has happened since the 1st of April. I guess we've seen nationally as well as internationally how the whole COVID challenge has played out. I don't necessarily want to go into the detail of that, other than to be positive about the responses of our community, whether it be the services, the key workers, but also their business community, to respond to the challenge and the needs. And we know about some of those businesses, particularly in the PPE space. Obviously, more recently, events in the US and those aspects are of concern and interest to all of us as citizens of the world, let alone our bit of it. And we'll have our views and thoughts. But I think it's quite important for us as a community that's driven by creating and delivering conditions for extraordinary economic success that becomes a new ordinary, but actually to use that success to improve society and all of the current gaps in society, that obviously we see these things and not immune from them. And particularly in relation to the recent aspect, as I say, started not so long ago in the US. I wonder whether, Ben, you might want to just come in and just point colleagues to something that we've said publicly, and then we'll move into some of the protocol. I'm not inviting any further comment unless it's really necessary, but if you do want to comment, please would you raise your hand and I'll endeavour to bring you in. But I think we should get into the meat of the meeting. I don't mean to sound that I'm negating that point, quite the contrary. Ben, did you want to come in?
Thanks, Roger. Well, I think I welcome those comments about the Black Lives Matter movement and all that has arisen as a result. I think as a LEP and as a command authority, I think it's given us all cause to question whether we're doing enough to create change and reduce racial inequality. And I think as an organisation, certainly we've concluded that there's more that we need to do. I don't think as an officer group we're starting from zero, but there's a lot more that we can do. This begins, I think, with kind of listening and learning, but we've got to then follow that through into action. I think within the organisation, therefore, we are looking very much to listen and learn from BAME colleagues and communities to understand what things look like from their perspectives. Working in an organisation like ours that does not fully reflect all of the communities that cover Leeds City region, I think from that we need to take bolder steps, and I think to proactively reduce racial inequality and injustice. I think we have been in a situation where we've been celebrating diversity, but that is not the same as seeking out and removing inequality and racism. We definitely are going to redouble our efforts to build a more diverse workforce. We're looking at that and doing that through our recruitment campaigns, but we need to work harder in that regard, and work harder with regard to our diversity and equality training for staff. So there's a lot as an organisation we need to do and want to do internally, and then ensure that externally that our policies and programmes also have a sharp lens on reducing racial inequality in our region, be that through skills, business support, transport, or other areas. So I just thought it was helpful, Roger, to set some of that down, so that, because I think that context is really important for our work going forwards.
Thank you. I'm going to allow just a couple of quick points, because obviously this is an important matter, but I don't want necessarily to detract from the whole of the meeting. So I'm going to allow just a couple of three quick points, and then I will move on. So forgive me, because I know we will, we all have views. So perhaps if I could invite Rashid Palmer first to share a point. I would say also in passing that we're probably recognised as a LEP of having, in all of its aspects of diversity, one of, if not the most diverse board nationally. And I think that's something we should, it reflects our values as a community, irrespective of the particular circumstances we just touched on. So Rashid, did you want to come in very quickly? And then Cameron, I think you wanted to come in, and then Councillor Pandor, in that order you indicated. So I'll follow that order. So Rashid first.
Yeah, so Roger, just to make everybody aware, I co-chair the IBM UK BAME Business Resource Group. We've been very active for over 10 years now, doing lots of work there. And if anybody's interested, I'm happy to share the approach and actions we've taken. And we're by no means perfect, but we've made a lot of progress, and we can share some of those experiences.
Okay, thank you. Cameron.
I just want to make myself available to anyone who'd like to speak or explore this, and for me to share my lived experience. Yeah, that's all.
Indeed, and I wanted to bring in Councillor Shabir Pandor, but also recognising, as I should have done, Kate as our diversity lead. Kate, forgive me. Shabir.
Quick point, Roger. This is about Black Lives Matter. It's not about BAME, like myself, I'm Asian. And I think the key point to understand is this is about Black people, because of the colour of their skin, will be prejudiced, discriminated. So you could be a millionaire, a middle-class Black person walking down the street, and you would more likely be stopped by the police if they feel that you are in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is nothing about the agenda that we think, and this is one of the things I've been trying to explain to the leaders in Kirklees, and I think they get it. This is not just about the inequality that we talk about. So that's where we need to start from. How do we actually start to make people feel that this is not about poverty? To be honest with you, this is about how people are perceived. And unfortunately, yes, Black people feel that they are perceived completely wrongly, especially Black men. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you, Shabir. Kate, did you want to come in? I just should share that both Shirley and Shirley Congdon and I think Judith Blake are still struggling to get in. So I don't know whether any colleagues on the technical side can help. Kate, did you want to come in? And this will be the last word, and we're going to move into the formal agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. And taking on board what Councillor Pandor said in terms of lived experience, I was just wanting to make the point about what role can civil society play in raising equity so that there is true equality of agency, power and experience. And I think the work that the LEP has already done and across the combined authority has been absolutely exemplary in focusing on that inclusion. But if anything, is going to give us more stir to make that mainstream part of the work that we're trying to do together. I hope this would be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Well put. So I'm going to now move into the agenda. I better just a bit of protocol. As I've said, please raise your hands if you have conflicts. As usual, declare them either up front or if something occurs during the meeting, just indicate. I hope you've all had a copy of the procedure rules that allow this meeting to be held in public, albeit remotely, and that you've had those procedural rules sent to you. And I'm going to do my best to make sure we comply with them fully. So let's move into the agenda. I'm not aware of any apologies of absence. Ruth.
Tom Reardon has sent his apologies.
Right. Okay.
And Councillor Aston, and I think Helen Featherstone was wanting to say something.
Yes, I was going to bring her in. I think it may be on declarations of interest.
Yes. Yeah.
Just bear with me. So please, can we note those apologies? Declarations of interest, Heather, Helen.
Yeah, sorry, just to be really clear and transparent, on item 7, YSP's obviously been impacted by COVID-19, as many other organisations have, and we have benefited from grants from Wakefield, but we don't have any intention at this time to apply for any further grants or loans from the city region.
Thank you, Helen. You did actually send me somebody send me a note. I should have remembered that. No, thank you for that. As I've said before, if anything occurs during the course of the meeting, by all means indicate and we'll capture it accordingly. Agenda item 3, exclusion of the press and public. I'm not sure there's any items where we wish so to do, and if they are watching, I hope that they are finding this interesting and informative. Taking items 4 and 5 together, minutes of our last formal meeting of the 25th of February, as well as the notes of our conference call before we develop this sort of protocol and procedure. I just wanted to just check with colleagues as to whether there are any areas that were in error or otherwise, particularly in relation to the minutes, and then seek their approval. And secondly, in relation to the conference call, any comments on the notes. So I'll pause there to see whether anybody wants to indicate, and if not, I'll take silence as approval for the minutes and a confirmation of the notes, because I don't think they need to be formally approved, but at least confirmed by this body. So Cameron, I think, Cameron's putting his thumb up, so that's fine, Cameron. And nobody else, so perhaps nods of the heads will just show me that I've got a core group of people indicating that's fine. Thank you. So we're going to move in. I hope James is on the line. So I'm guessing James is leading on this in terms of the economic reporting. And just to share with colleagues, because again, to help with the timing and not at all to restrict conversation or discussion or questioning, James, I'm going to invite you in what is billed as a sort of 10-minute slot, but we'll just see how we do, because again, it is such a while since we met formally, and obviously the economic impacts of some of the things we're going to talk about subsequently are in everybody's minds, both regionally as well as personally. So James, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. So yeah, with that kind of time limit in mind, I won't speak for too long. I'm sure everyone's had a chance to have a look at the paper, but essentially there's obviously clearly a lot of work going on to understand what the impact of COVID-19 has been so far on the economy. That said, although we're 3 months into the lockdown period, the amount of kind of hard economic data that gives us real insight locally remains quite limited. But the data we do have nationally and locally obviously points to an unprecedented impact. So some of the headline numbers nationally show almost 3 million new universal credit claimants nationally, which is unprecedented. Those numbers have fallen. There was a huge spike around the start of the lockdown period. Numbers have fallen back close to normal levels, but are still somewhat elevated. And that's true of a lot of indicators, really. There was a huge spike in activity, and that's kind of plateaued a little bit, but it's still higher than we would expect to see. Locally, up to the end of April, we've seen an increase of around 30,000 people claiming out of work benefits. So that takes the total up to about 88,000. So it's an increase of about 54%, which again is higher than anything we've seen in any of the past recessions, which we've got this type of data. It's generally accepted that we probably would have seen a much higher impact by this point if it hadn't have been for some of the support schemes which have been in place, particularly on the employment side, the job retention scheme, which has seen about just over 1 million companies furlough almost 9 million staff nationally. So that's obviously, proving a sort of very expensive support scheme in terms of its financial cost, but has helped to keep unemployment numbers below where we would have expected them to be without that in place. So certainly helping in that respect. We don't have any official data on how many people are accessing that scheme locally, but The Office for National Statistics have done some surveys which suggest around 27% of workers nationally have been furloughed. If that applied in West Yorkshire, we'd be looking at a number of around 293,000 people out of a workforce of just over 1 million who might have been furloughed if that proved the case locally. We've obviously been doing a lot of work actively to look at where we might see some areas of the economy and society that are more exposed than others as a result of both the lockdown and in the longer term, the recovery and the impact of the virus itself. As part of that, we've been gathering intelligence from the conversations that the LEP's growth managers have with businesses. The next item covers that in more detail, but from an intelligence perspective, as you might expect, the sectors that have really driven the highest volumes of contact have been those that have been in the consumer-facing sectors, so hospitality, retail, those types of industries which have seen the biggest kind of direct hit from lockdown have been the ones which have been in touch with the LEP most frequently, but also sectors that kind of supply into those industries are hardest hit as well and don't necessarily have the same level of visibility and support for some of the packages. So if you're supplying into the hospitality sector, for example, those businesses are seeing sort of very significant impacts as well. And those impacts, as you might expect, have really focused on issues around cash flow, access to finance, and kind of the short-term viability of the business. And that's driven a lot of the support schemes that are in place locally and nationally. And whilst those are still the biggest issues, that anecdotal evidence is now pointing to increases in numbers of businesses thinking about the practicalities of getting back to work. So both things like getting people to work safely, what transport options they have available, but also when they're there, managing social distancing in the workplace for them and customers and staff. So those issues are absolutely rising up the agenda. Looking ahead, there's been a lot of forecasts, as I'm sure a lot of you picked up on, that have looked at the kind of national and international economic impact of COVID-19. Clearly, given the nature of events, there's not a lot of kind of precedent for to build those forecasts upon. So they are hugely uncertain at the moment, and they are very much driven by the length of lockdown and the nature of its release for both different parts of the economy and different places in the world where industries have international supply chains. What happens in other places where those supply chains are connected can be as important as what happens in the UK. So it is very much a kind of connected picture. To understand all that in more detail, we're working with a company called Experian, who build the economic forecasting model we use in the city region and the wider region, and have done for more than 20 years. So they're currently working on 3 economic scenarios for us, which are kind of judgments of potential trajectories for the economy in different scenarios. Again, the next item touches on some of those kind of scenarios and recovery planning in more detail, but those kind of economic numbers and scenarios will feed into our thinking about that, and we should have those in the next weeks. Certainly by the end of this month, we'd expect to have some numbers that we can start to use from those forecasts and understand the kind of areas of the economy where those exposures will be greatest. We're also obviously working on a wider programme of work to understand the challenges and barriers to both businesses and people returning to work kind of safely and effectively. So looking at things like the prevalence of home working during lockdown as one example, from both business perspectives and individuals' perspectives, we're doing some survey work to understand how prevalent that has been, how people have found it, and what appetite there is for some of those changes to be with us in the longer term, even as hopefully some circumstances allow us to return something back towards normal circumstances. So an ongoing program of work to feed into the kind of monitoring that we're doing to understand current impacts, and also clearly ensuring that informs the recovery going forward. So that's the kind of very brief summary of where we are at the moment, but happy to kind of take any comments and questions as well.
Thank you, James. And before I bring Cully in, who has a question, and maybe others will, and we'll go through that, I think it's important, having read the Bank of England's latest, the Monetary Policy Committee report of their scenario, and maybe it's a hopeful view of a V-shaped recovery rather than something else. For me, the snapshot at the end of this month, the second quarter of calendar 2020, they imagine an economy in absolute terms not much bigger than it was in 2010, but with national debt almost double, sets the context for why, and I know it's segueing to what you're going to talk about, Brian, but not quite yet, segue to how we make sure we rescue what has been put into enforced hibernation as it's starting to come out of hibernation, how we recover but also reimagine the future of the economy of Leeds City region. And the final R of my 3 R's is we put in such resilience as we can against this and other things that might come in the next 5, 10 or 50 years. Cully, can I bring you in and you can ask your question of James?
Yeah, I was just to try and get an understanding of how much, how many approaches, if any, the cultural sector is making to us, or the LEP in a broader context, because obviously certainly the performing arts, and obviously with galleries and museums as well, that the sector is facing some devastating consequences, and there is some representation being made to Treasury and to DCMS, but I'd just be curious to know what's locally happened in that context, if anything, in terms of our relationship to the sector.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't have kind of specific numbers to hand, but we have absolutely had, quite a number of contacts from that sector. I'm not sure if it's something Brian might touch on in his item next, but yeah, as I say, there's kind of consumer-facing sectors which kind of have seen their premises closed, which has hugely impacted their revenue, have been the ones who've driven contact with us. And I think one thing that we have picked up from that is the kind of impact on the programme of events that's planned. So there's been that immediate impact, but it's having a forward impact in terms of what's in the kind of pipeline for the sector, especially as things kind of move on into the summer when a lot of that activity happens. So we've definitely seen quite a lot of contact from the sector. And I think just to pick up on one of the bits of data we do have, so I mentioned the surveys that ONS have done around the job retention scheme and how many staff have been furloughed. So it's about 27% across the economy, but they have broken that down a little bit by sector. And the arts and entertainment sector, which would incorporate a lot of the cultural activity, it is around 2/3 of staff which have been furloughed in that sector, according to that survey. Yeah. So it's right up there among sectors which have seen the biggest impact. So yeah, absolutely on our radar as one where there is a big kind of exposure there.
Yeah, and just as one other point, I mean, it's also worth noting for those who might not be aware that because the ecology is so based on freelancers and independents and individuals, there are a huge number of people falling through the gaps in terms of some of the safety government interventions that have been made so far. So I think we need to stay alert to that, that's a major problem for the region, especially given that that's such a prolific opportunity for growth here. And I'm aware that obviously the creative industries and TV and films through Screen Yorkshire have had some support in that, which is brilliant. But I think this issue is going to go away in terms of the deeper ecology that's going to be impacted.
Thank you, Kelly. Anybody else want to raise any questions before we move off this agenda item? Just scanning the screen. I hope I am not missing anybody that's not on screen. We just
sorry, if I can just pick up on Simon's point, which is made in the comments about
yes,
some work they've been doing with their own staff. So only 6% saying they want to return back to previous ways of working. I think that does mirror some other stuff that we've picked up. But just to plea really, if anyone does have any insight from that, either from their own companies or anything that comes out from industries that they're involved in. We're just very interested in any intelligence we can get at the moment. So if anyone has anything they can share directly with me, then please do get in touch. We're grateful for anything at the moment.
Thank you. Amir put in the chat room something similar about this new way of working. Did you want to come in, Simon, or were you just putting thumbs up?
That was a supportive thumbs up to James, but it was really to mean, feel free to get in touch offline, James, if you want to get behind that number, and I'll explain the context a little more if it would be helpful for you.
Yeah,
sure. I think I'm going to bring in Shirley in a minute, who wants to make a comment, but I do think you're right. Ways of working have changed. We probably have to work out how to make it work as well, so that we don't all spend from 9 in the morning till perhaps that same time at night in front of one of these screens, and all of the normal things that we need to do during the day are not squeezed in moments of rushing, in my case, up 3 flights of stairs to a place that ordinarily I might have just drifted along to when I had a quiet moment. So it is interesting, but I think what we have shown is with technology, even though some of the things are perhaps not as great as they could be, that actually we've managed to function pretty well. So can I bring in Shirley? And I don't think anybody else is indicating they want to speak other than to put supporting comments. Shirley, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Roger. It was just to make a comment on paragraph 2.5, where it states that the vacancies for social work and healthcare nursing jobs have remained relatively resilient. Obviously, this is an area that we see where we can grow this workforce and the associated jobs in digital health, etc. And yes. I did convene the Vice Chancellors along with Rob Webster recently, and we had a meeting to see how we could work on the 2 work streams of workforce and research and innovation in relation to health and social care. And there's an opportunity to bid for additional numbers of students in these areas of healthcare through the government's 5,000 extra numbers they've kept back for these types of students. They obviously wouldn't graduate until 3 years, but we are seeing how else we can grow this workforce.
Okay, thank you. Right, unless anybody's indicated, I'm going to move on to the next agenda item, which we've, I guess, leads neatly into it, Brian, in terms of our response and where we're going. As I said, those 3 R's of rescue, recovery, reimagining, and finally resilience. There was one area, I don't know whether Councillor Blake has managed to join us or not, but one of the areas in the paper at para 2.25 talks about the bus services, and I'm not sure whether you're covering that, Brian, or somebody else, because obviously that's of great import to all of us, but particularly for those that are not as fortunate, perhaps everybody on this call, in terms of having a car otherwise available. So Brian, over to you.
Okay, I mean, I can start on the transport point first. Bus and rail services will increase to around 70% of normal frequency, although Dave was saying that capacity is going to be constrained to between 10 and 20% because of social distancing. And at the beginning of May, the government announced another £250 million to promote walking and cycling initiatives. And I know that that negotiations are ongoing regarding emergency bus funding. I don't know if Ben or Dave want to come in on that transport point before I go on to the wider economic issues.
Who were you suggesting?
Chair, I can come in if it's useful.
Sure.
So just to say that that there is emergency funding measures in place for the rail industry through to September, and the bus industry through till early August. And there is a fairly active dialogue underway at present as to what will happen, particularly on the bus side after that point, with I think most certainly metropolitan urban areas arguing that there needs to be greater local influence over the funding that is going into the bus industry in order to be able to target services according to local need. and we'll see where those conversations come out.
Okay, thank you. Anybody
Okay.
else want to come in at this point? No, let's carry on, Brian, and then we'll take questions at the end.
Okay, well, just picking up where James left off on access to finance, the picture on that seems to be improving significantly, and members will recall that we were having regular meetings with the banks and the business-led bodies to lobby to get the banks to speed up their decision making and the speed with which money was getting into small businesses. I think a lot of that lobbying, both regionally and nationally, has been successful. The bounce back loan applications reached 700,000 last week, which was £21 billion, with an approval rate of 80%. The coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, over 9 billion has been lent out, and the approval rate was 51%. We have been asking the banks for some local data on what's been lent out in the Leeds City region, but at the moment we don't have that level of granularity. Still sticking with the theme of access to finance and the impact on the businesses across the region. You'll have seen in James' report that the number of business liquidations in the Leeds City region dropped to 148 last month, which was down 73%. But the main reason for that was because the solvency rules had been changed. So that's a particular anomaly, and I think the government are obviously hoping that businesses will be able to trade out of the current difficulties. In terms of what's happening locally, the growth managers have been working with the local authorities, and it's been an amazing effort because over 60,000 firms have been supported and £726 million worth of grants have been dispersed, which is an incredible achievement in such a short space of time. The business helplines continue to be busy, 80% up on the previous year, 2,700 inquiries, which is phenomenal. It is starting to quieten down a little bit now, but we're still getting inquiries from businesses looking for grant support and business advice. The other big issue that we've been dealing with is PPE, and of course nationally the government have scrapped VAT on PPE, which will save about £100 million. And the demand for PPE is still unprecedented. I think the World Health Organization was saying that something like 89 million masks a month are going to be required. But there's still quality issues with imports from Turkey and from China. So what we're seeing is UK-based manufacturing companies looking to step in and fill that gap. And of course, the government have appointed Lord Dayton as the PPE czar, and the government have just signed 4 contracts with UK manufacturers. Ramfoam, for example, are producing 3 million visors a week. At a local level, Harida Healthcare, who you recall I mentioned at the last meeting, were producing the mattresses for the Nightingale hospitals. They've diversified into producing reusable gowns, and they're currently in negotiations and discussions with Cabinet Office with a view to massively scaling up production of PPE for the region. We've also worked with 122 other firms across the region, across the Leeds City region, who've offered a range of support between a few thousand items and up to 5 million. 58 of those have been referred through to the Yorkshire Purchasing Organisation, and we've got 16 other businesses in the region that are working with the NHS and also providing services through the NHS portal. James touched on the furlough scheme, and the scheme ends in October. It's cost 90 billion so far, and he mentioned that 11.5 million workers have been laid off, which are on the scheme currently, which is about a third of the workforce, which in our region, as James said, is nearly 300,000 people. So what we've been doing is gearing up to provide training to furloughed workers through the Reboot programme and to support businesses and individuals through the Employment Hub to get matched up to some of those employment opportunities. It is really tough out there at the moment. As you'd expect, apprenticeship starts have dropped significantly. I think they fell by 75% for under 19s, and FE colleges are still closed. The government launched a training provider relief scheme to support apprenticeship providers, but there will need to be more done to support the sector. Internally, with regards to the COVID response, obviously we've got the Gold Command meetings that are overseeing the organisational response. We're going through an organisational financial impact analysis to determine whether there's likely to be a funding gap, as a result of the increased activity. We're briefing staff on a regular basis and unison, and providing ongoing advice and supporting home workers. And that's included things like regular webinars on devolution and the Black Lives Matters campaign. Cully mentioned creative industries, and while I remember, we did last week launch a cultural and creative industries programme, which is a grant programme of between 2,500 and 25,000 to support businesses. But I do take the point, it is a vulnerable sector. Community businesses and creative and cultural is so economically significant to the region. We need to lobby to get more funding support for that particular sector. I'll stop at that, and happy to take questions, Chairman. If
yeah, could I bring in Mandy Rudyard, who I think wants to. I picked up on the chat, and I think about lobbying for support for aerospace. I think.
Yes, obviously the aerospace industry, including airlines and through to people making components for those, have been hit badly.
Can you speak? Can you come closer?
Sorry, Mandy, I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is that better?
Yes. Yeah, much better.
So the aerospace industry, from airlines down to people that make components or provide services for aerospace, have been hit badly during the pandemic, because obviously aeroplanes have been grounded. I think that the aerospace industry in the UK is second or third in the world, and we need to make sure that some of the decisions that are being taken support our aerospace industry. If you look at Macron has announced support for the aerospace industry in France, but nothing is being done, and the recent changes to isolation on coming into the country will hit that industry further, and that will then affect our tourism industry as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think the government needs to be lobbied harder to support the aerospace industry and that whole engineering supply chain. We need to get more resource, to the front line to support that sector, which has been disproportionately affected with the pandemic.
It also affects high-paid jobs in the region, because those specialist companies are at the top of the chain in terms of providing well-paid jobs, and also apprenticeships, which you mentioned. And I think that if we don't get support to both the education providers, but to the industry providers for apprentices that are currently in role, then we will end up with a generation of lost skills again, which is what we're suffering from the 1970s.
Yeah, thank you, Mandy. I'd like to just mention to Brian, I know you put your hand up, Amir, that Amir's raised the question about obviously the loss of the link from Leeds Bradford to Heathrow. I guess that's something we're looking to see how that can be recovered, but I guess that's part of the wider point that Mandy's just mentioned. But I don't know whether you want to comment, Brian, before I bring in Councillor Hinchcliffe. And I think somebody else indicated, no, I think Amir did. Perhaps I'll bring Amir in, then you can answer. Amir.
Thanks. I guess it was just going on to the wider issue of business engagement. And I've kind of raised on a number of occasions, really, the issue that invariably, when you put support out for organisations to tap into, it's predicated on the organisation themselves being motivated enough and having enough vision and wherewithal to engage with that process. And I think invariably that has led to almost an accentuation of the inclusive growth issue, because a lot of the people who are underperforming are not engaging in the process, or they're not benefiting. What I'm seeing now, certainly in my circles, is that there's suddenly an uptake of interest in what is going on, what support might be available, and there's almost a sort of a very changed sort of level of engagement, which I think presents a really great opportunity. There was the thing with the professional services 2 hours consultation that's being given. I'd be very interested to know how that's going and what's happening with that. And on a wider note, and especially in light of recent events, sort of what the BAME sort of statistics are in terms of which businesses are actually engaging, in what regions, in what areas, and what ethnicity the owners are. Because it may be that there's people that are being missed out and there's organisations that are missed out. And I think the end result will be sort of compounding the inclusive growth issue that we've got.
Okay, Brian, I'm going to bring Councillor Hinchcliffe in a minute. Brian, do you want to address that, or do you want to come in now,
Yeah.
Susan?
Yeah, just to say, I was going to exactly the same question. So, you know, Amir talks about this all the time, and it's absolutely right. We can talk about Black Lives Matter, but actually we need to make sure we're reaching out to every business in this region. And therefore, some kind of ethnicity, gender kind of recording of everything we're doing. Have we got that in place now? Because we will be asked a question afterwards, and it's a good question to ask, and we need to have a good answer.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I think the success of the mentoring scheme has been incredible. You know, we had 60 odd mentors signed up. It was fully subscribed. But the level of granularity we need is what level of market penetration in key sectors have we got? What in terms of ethnicity, in terms of geographic location, so that we can start to address any potential shortfalls.
I think it's a big opportunity.
It's about targeting, yeah. I mean, it's a really good challenge, because I think, you know, if you ask what our level of market penetration is in, you know, Black-owned businesses or Asian businesses across the Leeds City region, it will be quite challenging to get that level of data, and we need to have that to inform future targeting and segmentation, so we can address some of these issues. So, you know, I'd like to come back on that one, perhaps at a future meeting, so that we can have a more detailed debate on it. But totally agree with what's been said.
Okay, thank you. Can I bring in Councillor Gorn?
Yes, I mean, I've put a little note in the chat now, but basically it's like making the point that, I mean, elsewhere on the agenda, we're talking about a climate emergency and having to completely change our economy to focus on the new skills needed for renewable energy and insulation and all those types of things, and changing, you know, whether it might be completely shifting our transport onto electric power, transit, you know, systems, all that type of thing. And I think there was reference made about the airline industry in France. If I recall correctly, Macron has made a commitment that they'll only bail out industries that they then take control over, and they also have to commit to very high level of sort of greening up their act in return for any state funding. And we should certainly support that line. You know, as I say, the high-tech industry, special steels, all that is all very relevant to making wind turbines, all sorts of other things that we're going to need. So, you know, just in the same way as, I mean, well, certainly not the same way as what happened with the mining industry in the 80s and 90s, but we should be sort of reskilling people for the new jobs rather than just trying to bail out the existing ones.
Absolutely right. That, you know, understanding what we're rescuing, but also what we're reimagining, I think is the narrative of the day. Can I bring in Councillor Pandor, I think indicated, and then I'll just check with anybody else wanted to say anything.
Thanks, Roger. Just a quick point in terms of the response and the economic recovery. I think we need to just appreciate and understand, and I think people are beginning to understand the impact of and the involvement of local authorities, and how the local authorities up and down England and Wales and Scotland and Ireland have actually managed to step in where government guidance was shortcoming. And it's not a political point, it's just that the top-down approach can only work to a certain level, and any lobbying that's done, it needs to actually also acknowledge and go hand in glove with local authority, because the key workers in my organisation, care workers, the refuse collectors, and everybody else who actually works on the front line, are actually putting themselves in harm's way. And we need to make sure that, on top of the NHS, all the other organisations that have actually worked so hard, the work that Combined Authority is doing, it's not a private sector body, it's a public sector body, but it still carries on in the background, trying to actually get some kind of sense in terms of how we can then move forward and get a new norm and get that economy more stronger and more vibrant moving forward. So it needs to be a complete system approach in terms of the lobbying that we're going to be doing. We can't leave any sector behind. The voluntary community sector has actually stepped in and done marvellous work. If it wasn't for the voluntary community sector in Kirklees, I'm sure it's the same in Leeds and Wakefield and everywhere else. Providing food parcels, taking people, dogs out for walks, keeping contact with people who are isolated, and that's been a lifeline, an artery to make sure that everybody feels safe and secure, and we carry on. So the recovery has got to actually be hand in glove with everything else that I've just talked about, Chair. Thanks.
I think you put that very well, Shabir. I do think that it's a sad thing it's taken this pandemic to make sure that the community spirit in our part of the world as well, everywhere else, is very much alive and well, and we need to keep it alive and well. And I agree with you at the same time as that recovering of the economy that actually delivers what we're all here to do. And I'm privileged to have such a great group of people to work with on actually the real prize is that social transformation, and using that economic success to that advantage. So, Brian, was there any more you wanted to say before I move to the recommendations on this paper?
No, not really. Thanks, Chairman. Just I think the point about local delivery and making sure that the services that we're offering are rooted in those local communities is really important, and understanding, the level of impact and market penetration in some of those key client groups, if you like, is going to be really important going forward, and getting a better understanding of that. So appreciate the comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, whilst noting the report, colleagues, can I direct you to page 38 of the papers, paragraph 8, and just take with a show of hands or a nod of heads that you're happy to approve those recommendations. It appears there's the odd nodding head, so I'll take that as unanimous. Thank you. We're going to move into the panel and committee reports, and I am going to try, within my framework of trying to finish at 4, to give a useful amount of time here. As previously, we'll assume you have read the paper, and I'm going to invite each of the panel chairs to make some perhaps bigger picture remarks, any additional points you want to make, and then perhaps open up for some further questioning. And I'm going to ask colleagues to make sure that anything we haven't covered on the chat bar, Julie, we perhaps pick up and make sure we do cover subsequently, because I am trying to do both at once, and I don't want to lose sight of any of the important points, particularly as we haven't met formally for such a while. So, Andrew, Wright, would you perhaps take us off on business innovation and growth?
Yes, certainly. We've had a good and well attended meeting in this format 2 or 3 weeks ago, where we spent a lot of time seeing what business support had been offered for businesses in the region, particularly in response to COVID-19. And you've read the report, so you'll have seen there's quite a bit of that, and also in the economic reporting as well, it was referred to. Just a couple of things probably to highlight. Increasing the capacity of the growth service has been pretty significant. 10 people trained to go in and provide extra support, and support given also increased in terms of the amount of time given. So typically the amount of time given has increased from 5 minutes to a quarter of an hour to more like 2 hours. And there is a reasonable uptake, I'd say reasonable rather than fantastic uptake of that advice that we're offering there. We've also pivoted some of the schemes that aim to help people out, and I personally attended those in my day job, and they are being useful. Online webinars, looking at some of the programs that we routinely deliver anyway, and doing that online rather than in pop-up or in meetings in the conurbations. The main thing to say, well, that was kind of a good catch-up that we've had already. But I think what we're even more excited about that's coming up now is a meeting that we're going to organise in a couple of weeks' time to follow up the initial meeting where we focus a lot more on the economic recovery planning. And I know Alan Rice has agreed to give us some framework for that, which will dovetail in with the work that's being done in that area by a number of other people on this call. Perhaps looking at a framework which says, okay, what are we doing to get ready for the recovery in the medium and long term, as well as the kind of firefighting that inevitably is going on at the moment. And perhaps the last remark about the context for the whole big panel effort is I think that the feeling of the panel members, we heard a number of stories of how people were getting on in their local environment, and it's already been said by Brian as well, it is really very difficult out there. And I think there was one remark that the recession that's coming may be more like the 1930s than recessions that we've seen in our lifetimes, and clearly that will have a big impact on people around this virtual table. Just 2 or 3 other points for things that are happening other than the big panel itself, other things that we do that support the big panel. We've had a digital board, which Kirsten chaired, focusing on the digital opportunities post-COVID, and we'll bring a paper back to this meeting next time on that. I think one of the highlights of that, and I've noticed it came up in a chat room comment just now here as well, that there probably needs to be more focus on home provision of broadband, and that the idea of having super fast connections to large office buildings in large cities might still be important, maybe, but actually, getting a decent level of service out to people really across where their homes are and where home working is going on, particularly bearing in mind the SME community that we support mainly in this group, is pretty important and something that perhaps we need to give renewed focus to. We did a Made Smarter board as well, and again, we'll bring papers back on that. We do see opportunity for Industry 4.0 and automation and use of big data to be ever more significant in the world that's coming post-COVID. And there's also been a Smarty conference, as people may know about the Smarty scheme, where Leeds City Region is a major contributor to 6 or 7 regions around Europe that are getting together and sharing best practice on smarter manufacturing. And there was a 2-day conference, which was to have been in Finland, which we did online, fairly arduous 2 days online, but very useful, and quite a long-term sort of program with vision through to 2023 and what's going on. Some good sharing already happening, and I'm optimistic that even more good stuff will come out of that. Lastly, from me, Connecting Innovation, which is the latest innovation product that we're just cutting over to. This is the one that links businesses with appropriate academics and departments in City Region higher education institutions. We are getting on with that. There's money available for it, and the work is going on already, contacting and consulting stakeholders. So we haven't just let that one stay undone. It's getting done, and progress will be made on that. So I'll stop there and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Amir, did you want to come in, rather than me do with MIT and REAP, just to come in there, because obviously it's even more important to the wider City Region now than it perhaps was when we went on this journey. Amir.
Yeah, I think it sounds like it was a really fascinating program, and I think this idea of having champions that can actually disseminate sort of concepts and pass it around amongst their networks is probably one of the best ways of trying to reach some of those harder to reach communities. And I think that it'd be really interesting to see. I mean, I've not had any interaction with it, and I'd be interested to know how that's working out, and certainly how we could get more involved and how it could be benefiting some of the harder to reach points of our region.
Thank you, Amir. I think it will be an agenda item for future meetings, and not too far in the future, as we move from the sort of formal part of the program with MIT and the workshop, as we begin to see how we roll this out across the wider City Region in the period toward the end of this year and early part of next year, as we get into implementation. We've done all the book work and the learning. We're doing, because I'm obviously involved, as you know, a lot of thinking, and we're very close to that point where we need to widen it out. So your point's well made, Amir. Thank you. Did Did anybody else want to come in on what Andrew has said? Mark's indicated, I know Shirley's made a comment, but Mark, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Roger. Yeah, Andrew, there's so many tremendous programs in BIG that are sort of have funding tied to them that are linked to job creation and also sort of grants and businesses contributing to grants. I'm just interested in a perspective of how, you know, the economic impact of COVID-19 is obviously having a suppression effect on jobs and a reduced ability for businesses to contribute. So I guess both now within the programs, but importantly, when we kind of look back on those business programs and we look at the benefits case and we look for the future funding and future programs, sort of how you're starting to think about that.
Yeah, okay. So there's definitely is a greater uptake of that service at the moment, which is why we've trained the extra 10 people, and delivery is intense. People are making applications and being helped to make applications. So the money is flowing already, which is the point about kind of dealing with the immediate crisis. The next meeting that we're going to have in a couple of weeks' time, and thanks very much for being on the last one, Mark. If you can come to the next one, it would be good. We will focus on, I think, the medium and longer term. So, what does this mean for our programs in the medium term? And I'm sure everybody on the panel is expecting that we will come up with a slightly different or certainly re-energized suite of product offerings. And you will have seen in the papers that there's a framework for how we think about recovery options in terms of, at the moment, doing quite a lot of work in finding out what the status is at the moment, and then moving forward over time to imagining what we need to provide for the future. So I don't have any pat answer to your what are we going to do question now, but I can point to the fact that there's at least 2 processes that are rolling now, which are about imagining what we need to do and being prepared to talk about how we're changing, over the next quite short period. I mean, I think we'll need to have good answers to that question in the next couple of months.
Thank you, Andrew. There's a couple of points in the chat room. I think Shirley's just sharing with colleagues of what's happening to widen out things. Kate very rightly talks about improved digital connectivity. We're all going to be doing more home working. And Amia asked a question about connecting to one of those programs that you just referred to, Andrew. Did you want to come in and ask that question, unless Andrew can see it on chat? Amia?
Yeah, happy to come in on it. Again, it's just about how stakeholders can either get in touch or how they can connect. And what I tend to find in my network is that a lot of people just don't seem to know about a lot of things that are going on. And I mean, even the consultation, I guess on a slightly wider note, when I sometimes see consultation links, even when you go on the consultation link and you go on it via a mobile device, it's actually quite cumbersome. And in some cases, even I've given up, and I've just thought it's actually not intuitive. But I would be interested to know, because I think that sounds like a really valuable program that I think there's certain people that I would love to put in connection with it. But it's just a case of knowing what the process is going to be for who gets involved in the stakeholder engagement.
Okay, well, maybe one of the officers can help me with this, but certainly the place to point people at in the first instance is the growth service, who are aware of the team that are ready to deliver this and are capable, and on occasion do proactively contact companies and firms that they're aware of who would benefit from it. The other stakeholders that they're contacting are also the people who've already been active and could be active within the universities and higher education institutions, who have got ideas and who will need local partners to execute those ideas. So I think it's probably an early stage at the moment. This version of the program's only been running a couple of months. Don't know whether any of the other or any of the officers want to comment and help me there.
Brian, did you want to come in? Anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I can do. I think obviously it's really important that we're inclusive, and I think one of the things we need to get better at is improving the connectivity between all the different stakeholders. If we talked about the innovation ecosystem and all the different stakeholders, I think we need to develop more sophisticated approaches to targeting those key stakeholders and making sure that we're leveraging the expertise from across, like, the 4 corners of that, that system, that innovation stakeholder system. I think that's really important going forward. I mean, we do engage directly with stakeholders through a number of different routes, and also with, you know, the business-led bodies and representative organisations, and with HE and FE. But I think there's more that we can do on that. Okay,
thank you. I'm going to ask Hilly if she wants to just come in with one last question she's put on chat, and then we're going to move on.
It's just only relating to young graduates and young people generally, because clearly the sort of statistics about their future employability as the economy takes a nosedive. It's what do we put in place to support them and their, you know, work opportunities, and obviously some of them are in that territory of innovation anyway, but creating the space for them to flourish and retain some of that talent.
Yeah, so certainly in terms of innovation and growth panel, if there are young entrepreneurs, we do support them, and we would be particularly delighted to see if there were more of them. And there's, you know, a lot of help available, which would be particularly appropriate to young people. How much young people do avail of that? Probably not enough. And I guess partly to Brian's point about, you know, reaching wider groups of people, wider numbers of stakeholders. Perhaps that is an area that we could consciously put more effort into, finding entrepreneurs and people who are innovating and wanting to start new things in a young person's group. And I think also when we come to the skills discussion as well, there'll be a lot of relevant stuff there for how this group can have more impact on young people. Because I do agree, I think it's the impact of the COVID on everybody is intense, but on the younger people, particularly people in the first half of their 20s, it's particularly intense at the moment.
And I think just to build on that, Andrew, hence why I believe MIT and the REAP agenda across the wider city region is ever more important than it was prior to this, and ensuring that we develop, in the words of MIT, an appropriately funded, staffed and resourced backbone organisation, as they call it, to ensure the opportunity to all segments of our society to come forward with ideas, test whether they work. If they do, let's crack on. And if they don't, come back with another idea rather than otherwise. So, but more of that later. Could I just check, because, you know, the danger with all these things, we could spend all of the meeting talking about it, that people are happy with the recommendation, that we know the progress on this. There are things to come back, but also to thank Andrew and his colleagues for all of the work they've been doing in the interim. Okay, I'm going to move on. Rashik, same rules, headlines that you want to add. Assume people read the paper, and let's get into some quick-fire questions.
Sure, there's only two things I want to highlight. One is, obviously we've got the adult education budget that's come through as part of devolution. Lots of work going on there. There's the consultation at the moment. It's an important part of the agenda, both pre and post COVID. So we've got a lot of work to do there, and Office is really helping there. The second thing is, as we start to think about how do we help folk who need to reposition themselves in new roles, forced career change, all those kind of things. The reboot program, we've kind of repurposed that. There's various activities going on there to really help support people who are going to be in a difficult position coming out of this. The third part, of course, is the commission, the Future Skills Commission that Councillor Hitchcliffe has been chairing. That was due to share its outcomes recently, but that's been moved to later because of not being able to do the face-to-face meeting. But the rest of it, I think, is in the document. I think the team have been doing a fabulous job in really stepping up on the challenge of how do we build the skills for the region that we need going forward, and repositioning the skills agenda.
Okay, thank you very much, Rashik. Any questions of Rashik? It would appear not, so that's... Oh, sorry, Andrew Wright would like to ask a question. Andrew.
Yeah, I was referred to earlier about whether we could offer training organisations or employers support with apprenticeships. I'm slightly declaring interest as a governor of Coaldale College. Yeah, it's been very disturbing to see the drop off in take up of apprenticeships, and even our ability to complete apprenticeships that are running now. Clearly, people have got lots of things on their minds and they're feeling short of money. So all of that's going to militate against apprenticeships. Is there more that we can do to support people to make sure these happen? And with an eye to the future, when we have the adult education budget, can we potentially maybe run some pilots or get some things ready that will allow us to roll more firmly on this when we've got a bit more money and to spend? Thank you.
So a couple of things. The answer is we're exploring various options already. So that the answer is yes, we can. We'll do as much as we can. We're also looking at reusing unspent levy monies as well. So we've got this the program which we piloted from back end of last year, where any large employers who've got levy monies that they've not been able to spend, we're trying to move that back and repurpose it to help create some of those apprentices as well. So I think, yes, there are things we're already doing, but there is more, and we'll come back with more.
Okay, Susan, did you want to come in and?
Yeah, just to state that is a problem that's a national problem, Andrew, and you're absolutely right in identifying it. If we don't do something to support our young people on apprenticeships at this time, then it's a dereliction of duty for the future workforce. But because it's a national issue, government do need to address it head on as well with some national funding specifically for that element, I would suggest. And I think it's beholden on all of us through the conversations that we have at national level to make sure that is pushed, because you're right, it's coming out stronger and stronger. And we look around the corner to September for the colleges and apprenticeship starts, and they are guaranteed to be much, much lower than they would normally be. So it's a problem for the whole sector as well as those individuals concerned.
Brian, did you want to come in?
Just to reiterate what Councillor Hinchcliffe said, and also the reference to the levy transfer service, which is, any large company that's got unspent levy, we're operating a levy transfer service to subsidise employers that want to take on an apprentice that might not otherwise do so because of a barrier being cost. I think the other thing that we can do just at a local level is to promote apprenticeships through the growth managers. Whenever we work with a company, we need to put apprenticeships top of the agenda, and that as well as graduate retention.
Thank you. I mean, this has been raised in a number of fora over the recent weeks, not least which the Bayes roundtables, and I think as recently as yesterday, Shirley, if you wanted to, it was probably the last of, or the most recent of any of us to have been speaking with the Secretary of State for Education. Do you want to just share with colleagues, and then I will remove the recommendations and we'll move on to the next item.
Yeah, so the Secretary of State requested a roundtable discussion with a number of Vice-Chancellors. So this was held yesterday with 14 VCs from around the country. He was interested in people's views on about apprenticeships and internships, graduate internships, and certainly is interested in receiving any ideas for schemes that would support graduate retention and graduate employment, and ideas to maintain apprenticeships. So I think that if we had solutions, then presenting these solutions would be fairly well received. I think there's an understanding this is a really key issue.
I think this, thank you, Shirley. I think this comes back to us as a region, in whatever guise, is coming forward with compelling offers, and not just a set of asks when it comes to ever more money. Just make sure that our offers are so compelling that they do get funded for the things we want to do. So before I move the recommendations, can I thank Rashik and his colleagues for all of their work, and can I just check that colleagues are happy to approve the recommendations on page 50, para 8. Just a nod of the head will be fine. That's fine, thank you. Now, Simon, there's obviously a substantive item on agenda item 10. So whilst we don't want to curtail conversation at that item, perhaps you give us any additional headlines from the recent Green Economy panel, and obviously, again, on the assumption that the people have read the paper.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And yes, so not taking any time away from the substantive item ahead, the quick updates are that our planned meeting the 7th of April was cancelled, so we had an informal virtual meeting to make sure that panel members were up to date as to where we were in terms of tackling the climate emergency. The recognition was that despite the challenges that COVID presents, the issues that we still face in respect of climate, and the work that we've already instructed and commissioned around setting pathways to meet our committed net zero carbon 2038 target are underway. They're still ongoing. What has been impacted for obvious reasons was the extent to which we have been able to engage in public consultation. The first reporting phase will be very soon, and that's going to be shared both shortly and widely with stakeholders over the summer and early autumn period. And we are looking to put in place some virtual stakeholder engagement surveys, webinars, and similar, covering the primary sectors that we are very keen to start putting some practical steps in place in terms of putting a pathway in place for decarbonisation. So all those plans are being reviewed right now. I will not dwell on the programmes. They are, I think, listed out quite thoroughly in paragraph 2.9, I think, other than to mention that the REBIZ programme is new, although that is something of a rebranding of the REF that was previously there. Both that and the Energy Accelerator were achieving good traction, although that has obviously been interrupted for obvious reasons recently, given it requires quite a lot of face-to-face contact. And also there's a very strong appetite from across the Green Economy panel, including our 3 new members with whom we had an induction session earlier this week, to input into the economic recovery plan, and not just because we recognise the importance of addressing the short-term and potentially medium-term challenges around the economic challenge we face, but also recognising that it presents a really good opportunity to look at green stimuli, look at the ways in which we can connect economic recovery with environmental protection, tackling the climate emergency, boosting jobs, and so on, and also enabling an inclusive, healthy, clean, resilient transition, a just transition to a different type of economy. So, we know from data across this country and other developed economies that certain green, in inverted commas, economic interventions can yield more jobs and have a better long-term return on public investment than necessarily trying to default back to earlier economic models. So we're very keen to have an involved discussion, and Alan is going to be joining us for an out of sort of sequence session on that on the 23rd of June, I think, but presently anyway. So there we are. I'll do it express train style for you to try and get some time back, but they're the ones that are not necessarily highlighted.
I hope a hydrogen-powered express train, Simon, in your case. Thank you, Simon. Saving people's questions. I noticed Ben's just about to get a cup of tea delivered. I wish I was getting one too.
That's service.
But maybe normal service resumes soon for me. Saving your questions for the climate emergency piece, are there any other questions anybody wants to raise on the rest of the report before I move the recommendation again? It would appear not. Thank you, Simon, and to your team, and also, on behalf of this board, welcome to all of your new members. And I should have said that to the other panels previously, and also for those to come. So can I just take a sort of a nod of the head that happy with the recommendation on page 50? I think we are. Councillor Swift, place panel.
Thank you, Roger. Not really a great deal to say about the past meeting, which obviously was quite some time ago and was just after the informal LEP board meeting, and perhaps covered a bit of similar area we touched on today in terms of what what the impacts of COVID might mean for places. Our next formal meeting is until the end of July. There's a fairly substantial agenda for that. I think particularly looking at what we call in place narrative, which is finding ways of talking about how the different parts of the city region tying together and what the contribution of each part is, to give a bit of the framework both for understanding how infrastructure investment fits with that, how housing development fits together with that picture. We are looking to set up an informal session for the panel sooner than that, so we can have a bit more of an in-depth discussion about the economic recovery plan, and again what the implications that might be, perhaps particularly for towns and city centres, a lot of which picking up some of the themes we've talked about earlier on in this meeting about, for example, what the implications are going to be if we see a substantial shift to home working, what that might mean in terms of space, what the alternatives might be for temporary and long-term different uses of retail space, and those kinds of things.
Thank you. And I guess picking up some of the threads from earlier conversation, as noted in 2.7 of the para 2.7 on page 58 of the paper, the importance in a post-devolution world of supporting the cultural and historic assets. And of course, I should perhaps declare a bit of an interest there, being involved in one in your hometown, Tim. But I guess it's to note the point, actually, rather than invite particular comment from you. Then, so any other comments anybody wants to make? Amir.
Yeah, as I said, I'm on the place panel, but it was some time ago. I think I just wanted to make the comment that I think when you're looking at property, the trends within property and the property sector, I think COVID has just accelerated a lot of trends that were already happening. And I think it's important that we do have a review of where our plans were in terms of urban design. But I think crucially, I think we need to be looking much more closely at what operationally is happening within different organizations and different institutions, and how can we create opportunities to create greater interaction and integration of operations. And I think that consolidates things that are already happening. But what it does is it sort of exposes things to people who wouldn't ordinarily be exposed to them. And I think that sort of the way that universities and arts organizations, flexible working offices, and even restaurants that become flexible working offices during the day, and how these different things merge together and operate together and actually work with their own, with different sets of people, but within a combined way, I think is a really important way of sort of trying to combat the situation that we're going to have in trying to rebuild the energy going back into city centres.
Yeah, you make a good point, actually, Amir. I don't know whether you wanted to respond, Councillor Swift, but maybe bring in Helen Featherstone, because I think she makes a point about actually we've also got to protect what we've got and not reorganise everything, I guess, is the essence of your remark, Helen.
Yeah, I just think it's a point to pause as well, isn't it? Because I think not only are some trends being accelerated, but other trends are also going backwards a bit, and so we just need to be mindful that when we're implementing change, it's not adversely impacting particular groups, for example.
And I think importantly, not to miss opportunities that perhaps we hitherto didn't exist. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Councillor Swift, before I move to the recommendation?
Not really, no, but pick up and make sure we don't lose sight of both of those things. I think Helen's point about protected characteristics, yeah, very aware of that. Some of the discussions that are going on about changing town centres and town centre space, and not losing sight of some of the challenges you can create there if you start, for example, creating a lot of pop-out space in streets. It's great, but actually, if you've got various disabilities, may not be so fantastic unless you're very careful with the design. So there are some really important points not to lose sight of there.
Yeah, thank you. There is a recommendation on page 58, which I'm guessing with a few nods we can at least note that. Thank you. Jana, yes, you make a good point about making sure we make the right decisions based on the right information. Absolutely, data is key to all this, and we must make sure that we challenge it if it perhaps might be suggesting other routes that are not the right routes. So. Can I move to the last of the panels, the Inclusive Growth and Public Policy panel? And I think, as people know, personally, this is, whilst everything's important to me, this is where the prize is for me and all of us, that all of our efforts produce a fairer, included across every facet of our economic and social diamond. And so over to you, Shabir, in terms of any particular highlight points you want to make.
I will be quick, Roger. Just a few quick points in terms of what the panel's been doing. The report self-explanatory. We went to Gibson Fire Station, Leeds Community Foundation. Kate and her team are doing some really great work there, supported by Zest and Gipsil. Members who were present there also give an update regarding what they're doing, and again, it's detailed in the report. We also talked about how we take the next steps forward in terms of developing the inclusive growth framework. And I think in a way, it's actually come at a timely time, if that makes sense. Because recent events, not just around COVID, but also around Black Lives Matter, has actually sharpened the focus for me, really, to be honest with you, in terms of what the priority is. Because, like you said, Roger, the agenda is so massive. And it's an opportunity to actually refocus the work programme. The framework will probably stay the same in terms of how we move forward. And I'm really pleased that we've got 4 fantastic new members. And one of them, Carl Oxford, who actually is a black man, who's got some really great ideas. So what I want to do is I want to actually re-energise the group. We've got the right people there. We've got the right team there. Once we finalise the framework, we need to start putting a work programme together and focus on the issue around not just what we're trying to do around the gap and the health inequalities, social income inequalities, but also get some quick wins in there, which I think we need to, regarding the Black community, the African, Caribbean and the West Indian community, because I think that's where I was saying to my chief executive just the other day that they are way behind. There may be some examples or some role models in the community, but there isn't enough. And we need to make sure that we actually get more role models. So the kind of stuff that we've seen is just something in history. I don't want to see history repeat itself again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Shabir. I think, Shirley, you have a question.
Thank you, Roger. Yeah, I was really pleased to see that there'd been some sort of consideration of the inclusive growth definition being restated. But I did wonder whether it was still strong enough, enabling as many people as possible to contribute to and benefit from. May not be sort of strong enough in terms of the inclusive nature of it. And I had another point about, I mentioned a point earlier about equality impact assessments. It's very different now. So you're not doing an equality impact assessment at the end of something. It's about designing in and co-producing the programs of work. And I was just interested to know how that happens, and do we think it's strong enough, that co-design of the starting off with the definitions and the programs of work?
Thank you, Shirley. Shabir.
Yeah, I'll say a few things, and maybe Alan might want to chip in if you want. I think you make a really valid point, Shirley, because to me, as a politician, bureaucracy is the way, the means to check and balance, but the system needs to be right. So they're 2 separate things. And the stuff you mentioned, for example, the equality impact assessment, that is a bureaucratic process. And what I want to do is I want to actually, and this is what I was saying, I want to change the focus. How we do it, I don't know, because this is a big question we're trying to grapple with. But hopefully, recent events will have brought things into focus. We're never going to get everything right, because as a politician, as a leader, I see deprivation in white estates where people are deprived and living in poverty. At the same time, I see in mixed communities, but at the same time, what into focus recently, right? Yeah, must be a priority for everybody, because that actually just completely pulls the rug underneath everything we do. And I don't want to be in a situation where 5, 10, 15, 20 years time we're back there. So yeah, your point is a bit well made. Alan, do you want to add anything, or Ben maybe?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I agree with all that's been said. I think that on a specific point of process, there will be a consultation exercise on the inclusive growth framework when we take it out, and we'll want to co-design the the interventions which are agreed as priorities from that with the communities that they are designed to, or that we would hope that they would support. The second thing is that both in light of COVID and the increased focus, as was discussed at the beginning, about tackling racial inequality, has given us, as I suppose, reminded us, if we needed reminding, that we need to make sure that when we're designing these services and products, they are targeted in the right way, and we need to take that into account as well. I don't know, Kate's been involved in some of this, so she might want to say something else. I don't know.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, if I may, yeah, I feel that we're getting to a point now whereby a lot of the teasing out of the terminology and the language and the structures, etc., because it has had to take place, and I think there's probably still a little bit of a way to go on that, because I think there's different understandings in terms of what that language does and what it means. But I've tried to put a point in the chat column about mainstreaming this work. You know, I think I do feel like I do bash on about it quite a lot, but so much of what everybody is doing affects and is affected by some of the communities that we're talking about here, and we could, as Roger, when he introduced this item, we could achieve such a step change in terms of outcomes if we were to prioritize this work in a way that meant that everybody felt that it was absolutely top of their agenda, rather than perhaps an add-on or something that is seen as some kind of a slight tick box exercise. And I know nobody wants to do that at outset, but actually in terms of the complexity of what everybody's trying to deal with, sometimes that's how it ends up. So I think, as Councillor Pandora has explained, there is process and so on, and clearly we have to do the process as it needs to be. I'm not very familiar with the process. You know, I'm not part of that system, so I'm probably making all sorts of mistakes in terms of saying this now. But I do think that actually this is the moment. This crisis, this is the opportunity for us to have a conversation, really honest conversation about where do we place the importance of this and how do we resource it? How important is it to us all that there is an inclusive agenda and that there's actually outcomes that we are prepared to measure? I totally support what Shirley says in terms of ambition. You know, let's fix that ambition, and I'd love it if the board were able to have a bit more time to discuss this further, because I think it's so fundamental to the potential change.
I think could I come in, Shabir? I think you're absolutely right, Kate, and I do think it is something this board perhaps later this year should have a greater conversation about. But I think in the context of an even bigger topic that this region hopefully is going to get benefit of come the early summer of next year in terms of devolution. And I think as I've said publicly at the recent WYCA meeting, about ensuring that we are all able to explain the benefits, what the hopes and aspirations and ambitions are for devolution, and how they positively impact on people's lives, families, communities, workplaces, etc. And I think so it does warrant that. And as I say, I think it's important that we, as a public-private sector partnership, or private-public sector partnership, whichever way you want to put it round, doesn't really matter to me, but we are a partnership, that we are about growth, but growth for purpose rather than just for its own sake. So I don't know whether you wanted to add anything, Shabir, because I'm going to, I think, move on. Although I don't know whether Rashid, you might have wanted to say something, although I've picked up a comment, but I'll just check with Rashid first, and then perhaps Shabir, final word. Rashid?
I'm fine. I think the comments have been made, so I think we're okay to move on, Roger.
Shabir?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that's said, and there's so many thoughts and ideas and whatever that's going in my head. You know, inequalities in its widest sense, health inequalities, you know, has become so pronounced that the writing was on the wall, and we can draw so many parallels to everything that's happening, and the focus is on this agenda, and it's how to actually get them quick wins, because stuff like this is a generational thing. We need to be absolutely clear what the definition is, but at the same time make it very ambitious, and we need to get on with the stuff that we know is wrong in society, but at the same time we need to carry society with us, because we don't want a part of society that feels they're badly done by, another society also feels badly done by. And the trick is, how do we actually carry both together whilst addressing the key issues that are coming out now?
Thank you.
Making sense.
Kelly, did you want to come in?
Yes, please. I just wanted to reiterate a couple of things. One that I, wholeheartedly support what Kate's been articulating, but just going back to a very early point she made, which is about the community sector being devastated imminently, and yet they are also the front-facing mechanism by which a lot of this work is being done. So whilst I absolutely welcome the opportunity to have a much bigger debate about how to utilise and really frame this within the inclusive agenda, I think there's something much more urgent that we really need to think about, because that might be too late for some of those organisations, that we might lose some of those things who are doing brilliant work, and some of them obviously are doing it at great cost to themselves personally, because it's driven by a duty and a responsibility and not necessarily by it being a paid opportunity. But I think we do need to think quite seriously about how we value all of the different aspects of what we mean by culture. And I don't mean that in terms of the performing arts or singing and dancing, but just about culture being about who we are and about how we celebrate who we are and how we live together and how we support each other. And I think this crisis has enabled people to really step up to recognizing the important values of things that perhaps we've not been as alert to until they've been taken away or become at risk. And so I think we have a responsibility as a cohort here to think about how we align those things, and also how we publicly talk about the value of our communities and the value of all of the cultural richness that they inhabit and the social connectivity that's vital to them being thriving communities and individuals. Thank you.
In the interest of time, I'm going to ask, not for any further comments, but perhaps both Councillor Swift and Councillor Pandor to perhaps reflect in the context of both of their particular panels, but more generally the other chairs. And I do take your point, Cully, that there is something that's immediate and short term, and also that suggestion of case that we should have a wider context discussion. So I'm going to move the agenda on with your agreement, just to check that you're happy to agree the recommendation on page 65 of the papers, paragraph 8.1, and just a few nods would be helpful. And just on the chat room, Shabir has kindly put a note that he would welcome that wider discussion. So thank you, Shabir. Melanie, as quickly as is appropriate, could we just update on the capital programme, because we're now in year 6 of the local growth fund. It only seemed like yesterday that I was pushing the button on a plan and a series of offers and asks, and a few months later I popped a rather large check, so to speak, and we've had a couple on top together with all the other things we've achieved. So Melanie, just give us a highlight of where we're at on what was, a standing start, only, as I say, only seemed like yesterday, but it's now 5 or more years ago.
That's right, Roger. Thank you. We're entering the last year of our growth deal programme, and we wanted to just update you on where we were at the year-end position with our capital programmes. So we had some delays in terms of being able to finalise that position, mainly due to COVID and not being able to get information reported back quickly enough. But just in terms of our position, we had achieved 70% of our spend against target at the end of last year. We knew that we were going to underspend an amount, but we didn't appreciate that it might be as significant as 30% under. And there are 3 reasons for this. So first of all, we've been awaiting some government decisions on jointly funded schemes with Growth Deal and government funding, and they've not come through. And we were waiting a long time last year for the HIF decisions, and that particularly held us up on York Central. We've also got 3 schemes that have live bids in with DfT around the Major Route Network Fund. And at the moment, again, that is delaying. DfT are asking for more information, and that is delaying our decision making in terms of our Growth Deal contribution to those schemes. And I think also we've had a delay, particularly in terms of the delivery of some of our transport fund schemes. So it's a particular concern on the transport side. And that is primarily due to bidding for a new round of funding on our Transforming Cities Fund. So our resources in our partner councils are the same people that are working on bids that are delivering our projects. And we had really good news on our TCF bid. We got the largest award in the country, and we've received £317 million for that programme, which is really great news. But what it's meant is that we've diverted some resource away from delivering our existing programmes. So our spend at the end of last year was certainly down on where we expected it to be. And then also there's the effect of COVID. So there's no doubt about it that has led to some projects that were due to start on site in Q4, not being able to do so in the month of March. And obviously there'll be a knock-on effect for that this year as well. That said, about Transport Fund, the SQW have been carrying out an independent review of the first 5 years of our progress. And actually that's a really positive position, because they were looking at our activity up to the autumn period, and they've given us a clean bill of health in terms of where we are in that first 5 years of Transport Fund. So we're really going to have a push in our next 5 years of Transport Fund to make sure that we can get our spend and our projects and our outputs and deliverables to a position where we want them to be. So that's where we are in terms of the programmes. And then obviously this year, we are now entering that final year of Growth Deal. Happy to take any questions if anyone has questions.
Thank you, Melanie. Any questions for Melanie? Any comments? I think there is whilst people are thinking, I think there is an important point that we make sure that we don't repeat what we thought of a few years ago about making sure we have that adequacy of capacity, not only to deal with the meal on the table, so to speak, but the further courses that might come. We have a huge history of success in bidding and outbidding, but equally we need to match that and continue to match that with extraordinary delivery. And I know the team has worked really hard on this, and certain things we've had a few twists and turns, and without being disrespectful, not everybody beyond the region has helped us understand why we were wanting to reprofile things to make sure that we spend, in our judgment, public money as wisely as we should, and indeed, when it came certainly to capital items, that we do it with future proofing as much as in mind as we can. And some of us have got the scars to prove that approach does prevail in the end. But anyway, any questions for Melanie before we move on? No, thank you, Melanie. And can you convey this board's thanks to all of yourself and your team for the sterling work you've done over the past 5 years, and let's keep the momentum up in this what currently is the final year.
Yes, thank you.
I'm moving. Is it Caroline I'm moving into, or is it Angela for this quick affirmation of people's appointments? I'm not sure who it is. Is it you, Angela, or you, Caroline? Whoever it is, please come in.
Yeah, Chair, I can deal with this quickly. It's
okay.
Thank you, Chair. It's a follow-on report to a previous one considered by this board in relation to additional appointments of private sector members to combined authority panels. I think it was due to the COVID pandemic that the recruitment exercise wasn't fully concluded before our last set of recommendations for panel members came forward. And this report proposes 2 additional nominations, one for the big panel and one for the employment and skills panels, both of which are named in the appendix to the report. And the report also puts forward a recommendation in terms of one of the LEP board members' term of office, Amir Hussein's first 3-year term comes to an end in November this year. And in accordance with our current constitution, the term of office is normally for a 3-year period with an optional extension of a further 3 years. And this report makes a recommendation that that 3-year period is extended for a second term. And equally, therefore, that the place that Amir Hussain holds on our panels is also extended, and that recommendation should be made to the combined authority. So the recommendations are set out there in the report, Chair, for members' consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure there's no need for debate of any of this. I just question, could I just take a show of hands or nods as to whether, and Amir, you need to think whether you want to vote for yourself or not, but whether people are happy with the recommendations in the paper. Yes, yes, they are. That's good. Congratulations to all of those, but particularly to our colleague Amir. And it only seems, again, only seems 5 minutes ago, Amir, that you were bedazzling me with your ideas, and thank you for your personal contribution, not only today but previously, and look forward to it during the next 3 years. So we'll move into, I think now, Simon. I've just noted, colleagues, we are running a little behind my time plan, so I'm going to reset the clock to 4:15. I know that Councillor Hinsby has to go at 4, but it may be just hopefully the wash-up items at the end. But if we can bring it forward, we will do. But I don't want to stifle too much this important agenda item, which I think this is the beginning, not so much the beginning, but developing this framework, which will be around for not forever, but will be around and important for years and decades to come. So I think you're going to lead on this, Simon, with support from Jackie, who I hope is on the call. Is that right, Simon?
Yes, that's correct. Thanks, Chair. That's correct. Jackie and I are going to do this, present this item together. And the aim here, I mean, we're taking the papers as read. The aim here, of course, is to propose an approach to ensure that the LEP and the panels collaborate to develop responses to the climate emergency. At our last face-to-face LEP board meeting, we discussed this in some depth, and I was very keen to get the point across that if the response to the climate emergency, both in terms of mitigation and resilience, was left in some sort of delegated item to the Green Economy panel, then the outcome would undoubtedly be failure. There is singularly no way that we can isolate this as an issue and drop it into a silo. It's fully interwoven into everything that we do and the decisions that we take. And I was struck by the quality of the conversations before, recognizing how matters relating to deprivation, relating to place, relating to people's experience of COVID, they all interrelate. And of course, the quality of the environment in which we are living and the resilience we have to climate change interrelates to that also. And what we're talking about here is a multi-generational issue that will cut across all parts of our region as well as globally, and will tend to correlate with greater impacts in areas of existing need and deprivation. So it's a matter that we need to really fully embrace. And whilst the immediacy of the COVID crisis is there for all to see, here we have something that is already locked in to some degree, and that we have a narrow window of opportunity in which to engage and ideally start tipping negatives into positives. Because of course, just as the think matters related to society, place and inclusiveness, it also offers opportunities to think about the way in which we make decisions about our infrastructure, about the places that we live, the environment that we live in, the types of jobs and the sources of energy and so on that go forwards. But the challenge is really very substantial. There are some thorough appendices attached to this, and if you haven't read them or you've scanned them, it really would be worth going back to them and reading them again, because there are some very stark numbers in there. They're derived from work that we have commissioned and has been done for us by Tyndall and others. And what this paper is really a start of a 10 on how each of the panels might really consider how to work in a collaborative way, and so we can form up into a bit of a Venn diagram where everybody reinforces everybody else. But it's really up to the panels to explore this and what they can do. And so, and of course, how I and my panel members and the colleagues that support us can support them. So we've got three really key things that we'd like to get at from today. I'll just go over those briefly, and then I'll pass over to Jackie to give us some examples of the thinking that she and colleagues have been doing. But firstly, we want some ideas, either today or afterwards, as to how the various panels, all of them, would like to receive information, how they'd like to be updated, and how they would like to develop their understanding of this area. And that actually includes a discussion we also had last time, and just minded to mention the role in which the creative arts and others can be used to inform and assist in communication and engagement with the wider public. It's a underdeveloped discussion, so that is something I'd also like to pick up as part of this response from panels. Also keen that the board endorses the panels playing a significant role in tackling the climate emergency. In the next 6 months, outline what they're going to explore and influence, and how we really actively seek to build in collaboration and drive out contradiction, and how the board will endorse the creation of climate champions or advocates, or frankly whatever nomenclature you prefer, for each of the panels, so that we can produce a bit of a network and get a bit of an ecosystem going, and really put some momentum to this, so that it isn't just a standing item in the meeting, but it comes to life in between those meeting cycles. So 3 asks, each of them pretty big, but we'll come back to those at the end, but please bear them in mind. And I think, Jackie, if you could maybe just drop into some of the details and pull out some examples and bring it to life a little bit, that would be super.
Brilliant. Thanks, Simon. So yeah, as Simon said, really, this paper is meant to be a starter for 10. It is just a kind of a list of ideas meant to kind of whet your appetite, I suppose, to show you the art of the possible. It's by no means an extensive and exhaustive list. What we have proposed to try and make this manageable, I suppose, for all of the panels is a kind of a 2-phased approach. So the first phase is really very much around the learning what our regional priorities in this space should be, because we realise that for all of the panels, it's quite hard and quite daunting to necessarily know where to start on such a big an agenda. And there are some things that will result in multiple benefits rather than just some single ones. So what we'd like to suggest for the panels is that you receive the results of some work we've been doing. Simon mentioned it already. It's in the papers. It's extensively in the appendixes, so I won't repeat what it is. But our emission reduction pathways work, in simple terms, will help us as a region to understand how we meet that net zero 2038 target, and the key things that we need to start to do. So it's a really important piece of work, and it might start to really help focus all of the panels, so you can see where some of your strengths may be in supporting some of those actions that we absolutely have to do to get anywhere near meeting that target. It would also obviously help you to then prioritise actions, as I said. The second phase is then really looking at how yourselves as the panels can start to develop your own plans. So again, just to reiterate, these are just suggestions. They're no means things that you absolutely have to do. They're things for you to consider, to go away and ponder. But just to give you a bit of a flavour, I won't go through every single one. I just think that the papers have been read. But for the panels around, for the green economy panel in particular, obviously that has led this agenda for a number of years. As Simon said, clearly we can't do it on our own. So the suggestion is that the green economy panel, with its zero emission transport working group, which is the link to our transport committee side of work, they will continue to drive the actions that come out of our emission reductions pathway. They will continue to deliver our actions that are already in our energy strategies, our transport strategies. They will be the ones driving some of those really practical actions in that space. For some of the other panels, though, where this might be newer potentially, but where there's great opportunity. So taking the inclusive growth panel, for example, we could develop a well-managed just decarbonisation transition. So this could build on our economic strengths of the North and our region, to deliver new, high-skilled, high-wage, low-carbon economy of the future. But really important to that as well is that we don't leave any communities behind. We do have a legacy of energy and fossil fuel intensive companies, businesses. We don't want them to disappear, but we want them to decarbonise. It's about making sure it's just fair transition. We've also talked about obviously communities and particularly things like fuel poverty, some of these other areas. So again, really important we don't leave people behind. So that could be one area where the Inclusive Growth Panel is particularly well placed to start to help to discuss those. Moving on to the Place Panel, and again, we have started some conversations with the panel earlier in the year. But again, this panel is really well placed to start to look at how we decarbonise our communities and how we start to look at things like spatial planning to encourage low and zero carbon living, working, those kind of elements. The other part that the panel may be very interested in, and again, there's a theme coming up from all of the discussions today, the resilience and supporting our communities. We know that our climate will change as a result of the carbon that we've emitted to date. So we need to better prepare our communities and make sure that they are resilient for changes in climate, both now and in the future. So again, the climate resilience element is a really important one. Again, potentially the panel may well be well placed to lead on. Moving on very quickly to the ESP, and again here, huge amount of opportunity for decarbonising our economy and creating a range of different skills, opportunities, new industries and new roles that come from that. It's fair to say that we probably don't necessarily fully understand that full potential at the moment. So again, that could be a really interesting area for this panel in particular to start to unpick. I know that there's things like skills plans. We've already had conversations with the chairs about how we can better work on some of this together. So it's a huge area of opportunity. Also does link very nicely into COVID-19 and some of that kind of green opportunities that Simon mentioned as well. Moving on to the big panel. So again, there's been some early conversations on this in January of this year. Huge amount of potential for the panels to look at. Not only how we support our businesses to decarbonise and remain productive and competitive, but again, making sure that our businesses are resilient to current and future changes in climate. Flooding is a good example of that. But also looking at particularly innovation, emerging clean growth sectors that we're starting to identify and what we can do there, again, to support that growing industry. And again, COVID-19, it's an opportunity there to build back better. So that's a really kind of high-level whistle-stop tour of a few ideas that each of the panels might wish to consider. Figure 1 in the pack also kind of gives you a bit of more examples for panels to consider. The only other things just to mention is that obviously the LEP itself, we think there's a really pivotal role in pulling together all of this great activity and showing how, as a LEP, we're addressing and tackling climate change. And of course, the combined authority, we've already identified how we're playing our part in this work, and we have a kind of a tackling climate emergency action plan of ourselves. Some of that work clearly will feed into the work that the panels may wish to consider. But again, we're also strengthening decision making, those kind of things. So combined, actually, there's a huge amount of opportunity for us to really start to kind of work better together on some of these really important issues. And the final thing just to mention is that it would be great if we could set up some tackling climate emergency champions. As Simon says, for one panel, for the Green Economy panel to try and do this on its own, it just won't be able to achieve what we need to. So again, we'd like to suggest champions so that they can be the people that are championing this agenda when necessarily the Green Economy panel are not there in the room. So I'm going to pass you over to Simon now, but thanks everyone.
Thank you, Jackie. Simon.
Thanks, Jackie. That's super. So lots of opportunities there, and I think also we shouldn't forget the interplay with the Transport Committee. It's there in the diagrams, but obviously given where our emissions come from and the somewhat disproportionate representation of our ground travel in terms of the contribution to the emissions, very important linkages there as well. Mark and I, and soon hopefully somebody to deputise for me, sit on that panel. So there is, on that committee rather, so there is connectivity there, but clearly one to draw through too. So lots of opportunities, some opportunities really to explore relevant areas and actions. So those questions again are, how would the panels like to receive information on the pathways work and get involved? We'd love to have all panels involved. Can the board endorse all the panels playing a significant role in helping to tackle this emergency that we face? And within the next 6 months outline, those areas as to what they're going to be exploring and influencing, and also to endorse and actively support, I would hope, the creation of the climate champions and advocates. And of course, if anybody else has got any creative suggestions or contributions to make, this is a pump primer rather than an exhaustive list of asks. Really, it needs the and the different lenses we all look through to really accelerate us towards the targets we've set and communicated very publicly. Net zero by 2038 and significant progress by 2030. That's less than 10 years away. So we really need to get moving alongside the challenges we faced.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Jackie. Before I open it up for questions and comments, and actually, Shirley, you partly echo my own perhaps ask really. And when I say an idiot's guide, I refer to myself, not anybody on the call or listening or otherwise. I think it would be really helpful for us, because this is obviously an important, it is one of the most important things we're going to deal with locally as well as nationally and internationally. Actually, I'd like to get not understanding from the bottom up of the interventions, but actually top down the size and shape of the problem and be able to understand some of the moving parts. You pick up through the paper very helpfully that that transport, based on 2017 emissions, transport's about 38%, of which 97% of that is road, and within that 70% of that is cars and vans. Just an understanding, and I think to Shirley's point about the various interventions, some of which will happen sooner rather than later, the so-called quick wins, some of which may be later. If tomorrow we had hydrogen buses everywhere in the city region, that would be great. That would have a massive impact. But equally, we're not going to have, hydrogen aeroplanes anytime soon. But we might have one day. I've just made my point. So I think for me, it would be really helpful. And I think it would be also helpful when it comes to us as the board championing this agenda, as well as individual people who do the championing role going forward. So perhaps I could ask for that, not necessarily for now, Simon, but again, I'll bring you others and see what they think.
Yeah, well, what I can certainly do right now is offer to put together an online session. I will switch hats between my chair of the Green Economy panel with my seat as a visiting professor in sustainability and innovation, and also my private sector work. And I will take whoever wishes to join me on that online meeting through the background information. We can pull that apart together. We can talk about lessons from other parts of the economy, from other developed economies as well. Frankly, we can spend as much time as people are willing to spend on that, because if we're going to do this, I need to invest alongside everybody else in terms of getting the knowledge to where it needs to be. So
I think that would be really helpful, Simon. Maybe we can suggest that, and you can give some perhaps one or two options, subject to obviously your own busy life, so people like me could become not as credentialed clearly as somebody like you and colleagues you work with on the Green Economy panel and beyond, but just at least better informed about some of the moving parts. And forgive me, colleagues, I can't help myself. The numbers always help me think about it strategically as well as tactically, and I think there are others would probably want to get involved. So yes, so perhaps we'll take that one away. So perhaps open it up for comments, questions, observations. There are a series of recommendations, and I hope that we will be able to endorse all of those rather than any particular ones. But we'll come to that momentarily. Colleagues. Anybody want to indicate that'd like to speak? I know I've got a lot on the chat room, so there's a lot come in. So if you want to speak, perhaps raise a hand and I'll try and come to pick it right. I'm going to go to Mark Roberts and then Andrew Wright thereafter. And if anybody else wants to thereafter raise a hand, I'll hopefully pick it up round via the chat at this late stage. Mark.
Thank you, Roger, and Simon. Heartily endorse the paper and the progress that we're making, specifically on transport. As you know, I sit with you on Transport Committee, but I also represent our LEP on Transport for the North. And I think we have a role as well to influence bodies such as that to bring forward their targets. So specifically, their commitment to net zero is 2050. Ours is 2038, and that causes a gap. And I think we're going to be dependent on working collaboratively with bodies like Transport for the North to sort of achieve what we want to achieve as a LEP board. So I think my sort of plea to this board is to sort of help me, bring some influence to Transport for the North and ask them to, become more aggressive and ambitious with their target.
Great. Can I come in on that, Roger, briefly?
Sure.
Thank you. Well, firstly, so thanks, Mark, and also, yeah, I mean, I fully agree with that, and I think only 3 real comments here. One is that our geography is an economic geography and is as such entirely artificial as far as both regional economic and global climate-related matters are concerned. It matters not iota where the emission is from. It goes into the atmospheric physics
meeting.
I think, Councillor Byrne, you're not. We can hear you.
Councillor Gorn, could you go on mute, please?
I'm sorry, I thought I was on mute. Apologies for that.
We don't want to be in the middle of a domestic.
Just having a cup of tea brought to me. Sorry.
Look at you.
Okay.
Hope you get a biscuit as well. Nothing's arrived from me as yet, but anyway.
So the second point there, to Mark's observations, is a very valid one. So in my work outside of this sphere, increasingly the misalignment of target dates is an issue. So yes, between different authorities, combined or otherwise. But then if we think about some of our regulated entities and the energy network, so stepping away from transport briefly, the geography covered by Northern Power Grid is different to the geography covered by Northern Gas Networks, and the targets to which they are regulated are national, which is 2050, but the local expectations to which they are held can range from 2036 all the way through to 2050. So there is an ongoing challenge about trying to bring all of those different targets and focuses and strategies and sub-strategies into some sort of alignment, and ideally go to the highest common denominator, not the lowest common denominator in terms of ambition.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Did anybody else want to come in? I'm conscious, some of our colleagues who haven't had a chance to express any thoughts or otherwise don't have to speak at all, but I'm conscious, Councillor Cooper, Cameron and Joe, Joanne Robinson, if you wanted to come in on any of these, by all means do so. As I said, there's no requirement. Anybody else want to indicate on this before we? Andrew, you want to come? Oh, sorry, Andrew, you did want to come in. Forgive me. My chair going away now. I think I'm getting a bit chair tired.
Yeah, so I'm very happy that the big panel row in and help with the effort and the idea of putting a champion up. I think is very sensible, and we'll think about who would be best placed to do that. Last time you spoke, you talked about budgets, and I thought that really brought things into focus very nicely. In terms of what the overall ask was, just how high the mountain is to climb, and the sort of timescales that we need to achieve things in. Maybe it's something could be discussed in the session that you've kindly offered about whether there's something about apportioning budgets or letting each panel sort of feel like the kind of scale of help that it needs to offer if overall we're going to hit the overall target, just to kind of calibrate it. Because, at the moment, I think we're all just feeling that we need to do everything we can, and that's true. The danger is that you end up feeling that, but actually not doing enough. And the budget thing does, I think, bring it into focus if we could do that. Maybe now, maybe later stage.
And maybe if I make a suggestion, sorry, Simon, to panel chairs generally, they begin to put in, as they're beginning to, in their own panel notes, records, etc. How and Simon, how this does knit together, because we want to make sure that we see how it knits together, but we also want to expose where actually there are gaps, because it'll be the gaps that we'll fall into rather than actually rather than achieve what we actually want to achieve by 2030 and 2038 at the latest.
Yeah, I think that's, Andrew, thank you for that. I'll touch on that just in a moment. Roger, you're right, and we shouldn't be scared of those gaps. There will be gaps. We know where some of them are. We don't know where others are, and we have to be dealing with the reality of the situation rather than the rhetoric that we might be inclined sometimes to wrap it up in. We're doing pretty well as a region, but we're not doing well enough. And the budget that we have, to Andrew's point, is derivative of the global carbon budget to stay within the Paris agreements, which are legally binding on this country, and then they are in turn derivative from our national budget to a regional budget. And we know from that if we don't change anything, now this assumes we don't do anything that will push the carbon emissions up, but if we just stay as we are, then we'll burn through our carbon budget in 8 years from now. And that's the carbon budget to the end of the century. So yeah, that is explicit in the appendices, and I can bring that to life as to what that means. And that is starting from a stable base point now. If decisions are made, investments are made that change that in a direction, all that will do is shorten the time frame. So we have a bit of a sliding scale to move here. We can either extend the life of the budget, or we can bring it closer to us based on the decisions that we take. And as for apportioning, certain amounts of that budget to the different panels, not sure how we do that, but certainly looking at the ability to exert influence on the sectors that have the greatest impact on that budget, that might be a really helpful way of looking at it. So there may be certain panels that have more influence in sector A rather than sector B, and so on. And in turn, we can extrapolate from that what the budget would be around that sector, and certain panels could go on point for that share of the budget. We could do it like that, I think, and it's a good idea. I'd not thought about that before, and I'll put some thought into that prior to putting the session I've offered, and thereby creating something a rod for my back between now and whenever we do that. But I'll bear that in mind. It's a good suggestion. Thank you.
And I think also, Simon, to steal the words of Al Gore on this subject, to confront the inconvenient truths.
Yeah.
There may be things that from a carbon perspective we could accelerate, but they have unintended adverse consequences, perhaps immediate, short term, or even longer term, on some of the other social aspects. And I guess, and let's not get into a topic area, but there'll be about those, forgive the phraseology, trade-offs, and at least being transparent about them and saying, no, this is, primus inter pares, and as a consequence, that will have to be an unintended but a necessary impact that because of that, that, or the other. So I guess that'll develop as this work unfolds.
Well, that's right, and I think we should get used to the terminology of trade-off, because that is not a phrase to apologise for. That's a phrase that's in active use across sectors, organisations, and and in government as well, because there are trade-offs to be made. And the mindset to which you allude is that of a just transition, and the work that we've been involved in with Nick Robbins particularly, but and also with colleagues locally, has been really looking at the way in which the decarbonisation of an economy can be done to create net social gain rather than net social damage. And if we want to look at what an unjust economic transition might look like, and the social and economic scar tissue that we're going to be left behind, there are plenty of examples of that within our region, particularly in the former mining communities, where that transition, regardless of whether it needed to happen, it happened, and it happened in a way that left a lot of damage in place. And we need to be alive to the potential for us to do that again and make sure that that doesn't happen.
You're absolutely right, Sam. And again, just to share with colleagues, I was struck by one of the colleagues on the MIT REAP, the Kentucky cohort, and how in a similar issue to bits of Yorkshire, particularly South Yorkshire, how they are now a hotbed for coding techniques and ability to have retrained people who used to dig up coal to do coding, and that's part of that aspiration. So in the interest of time, before I move the recommendations, anybody else want to add anything? I mean, this is going to be a continuing topic area. It's germane to the inclusivity, it's germane to the better place to live, let alone work, etc. So anybody else want anything to add? Joanna?
Thanks, Roger. Yeah, I think probably the most reluctant group of people that can impact on this agenda is the business community, certain sectors obviously more than others, but certainly within the SME environment. And I think we just need to make sure that we think about how we bring them along with us, because you know, it'll be how it impacts on the bottom line. And I think it's something that many business leaders at the moment are just thinking this is something that we, you know, is a few years down the line and we don't actually have to tackle it. So I think we need to use the business communications group and any other organisations that we can to try and bring the business community with us on this.
Certainly, and certainly with this board's agreement, not necessarily asked for now, but it would be my intention to take more of a role in this, Simon, insofar as it's supportive of what colleagues are doing rather than otherwise, because I do think, and I think this should somehow weave into, and it's only a personal observation, but weave into that hope for future, that devolution, the first stage of which in successive stages will produce for our communities, perhaps long after somebody like me might be gone, but not necessarily everybody else on this call, but because I think it is really important that vision of that good growth, good and better jobs, but above all, good, healthy lives. And so, so I think, unless Sam, you want to make a final comment, and then I'm going to move the recommendation.
Yeah, just because I wanted to just reflect back to John's comment there, and for me that links a little to what I was saying in the early comments about really learning from the arts in terms of communication. Also to Amir, to talking about the way in which the business community he was referring to earlier either has visibility or not of certain agendas and opportunities. I think it's all part of the same piece, and it's a really important thing for us to again look at the realities of and be creative in terms of how we address it, because it's relatively easy to communicate with people who are already engaged. And given the nature of the economy and the way our economy is built, that is the minority at the moment. You know, the corporate Leeds City region is to a significant extent engaged, but is SME Leeds City region? Well, not to the extent that we need it to be. And so I don't think we have to shy away from that. And I entirely endorse what John said. And we, I'm open to as many suggestions as people are able to put my way, because, unapologetically, I come from more of a corporate and academic background rather than from an SME background. So, help in that respect would be welcome. And thank you for your offer as well, Roger. That would be hugely welcome also. As you know, we've had that conversation.
Okay, thank you. So can I turn to the recommendations on page 96, 8.1 through 8.4, and can I just seek your approval to those recommendations, which includes climate champions and advocates for all the panels and beyond, I guess. Lots of thumbs up, so yes, you've got that. Thank you very much, colleagues. I should just note, Cully, I picked up your point, we'll take offline, and particularly for newer board members who might wish to be involved in one or more of the panels, perhaps we could pick that up, Alan, separately, Julie, separately from this meeting. We are in the home straight, if that's not, although this is not the whatever Derby or whatever it is. Corporate performance quickly, Andrew, and then I think quickly, if you want to just table the calendar of meetings, this I guess is there for information, as indeed items 13 and 14 are. And just to note that our next meeting will be on Tuesday the 14th of July, and we're starting early at 1 o'clock. Whether it'll be in this format or other, I think it's highly likely to be in this format, but we'll take a judgment call on that a little nearer the date. Angela.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely recognising the time. You're quite right. The corporate performance report here is for your information. It's your standard report. Each meeting, it runs through budget monitoring situation. Clearly, there's a lot of work going on about budgets as a result of COVID. There's an update on the closing position on last year's KPIs, some further information about the LEP delivery plan. And it also includes the draft LEP financial statement, which we have produced in tandem with the draft annual accounts, which have also been published. You've also got the internal audit plan, just for information, to see what sort of work they're doing in the coming year. And again, noting that that will be reviewed in the light of the changes that have taken place. Similarly, the risk register is attached in the appendix. That sets out, again, some of the changes to our risks as a result of the work happening on COVID. And that is affecting, obviously, our planning going forward. So that is all there for information. And as you said, if you want me to just move seamlessly into the next item, which is also for noting, is the calendar of meetings, which is there for information. Obviously, the LEP board are the ones that are pertinent and the panels, but the full set of combined authority and LEP meetings are there for information and for noting.
Okay, any questions or comments on that? Or can we just take those as for information, but importantly that you noted them? One thing that I just wanted to share with colleagues is that I am very keen, subject to all of the demands on the team's time, that come the perhaps autumn, we're able to begin to showcase the impact of all we've done with the Local Growth Fund and the Transport Fund to date, to set, as I said, set some context of the, the importance of the next stage of funding, which is called, in a capsule, called devolution, because we have done some amazing stuff, and I'm keen that we perhaps pursue that. But I do recognise the demands on the team at the moment are directed rightly into other places, but something that I had in my head, because I think as a LEP family, we owe it actually to ourselves, but all those people who give up their time, but actually our communities, to show what we have achieved along the journey of economic growth and social transformation. So I just share that with you. Can I thank everybody, colleagues, fellow board members. We'll try and pick up the chat comments, and if insofar as we haven't addressed a question either specifically or generally topically, to see whether we can perhaps in the notes just pick them up, because I'd like to try and do that. And maybe, and I'm sure Alan and Brian are probably thinking, oh no, don't ask us to do that. But I think it's important that we just try and encapsulate that if we can. Thank you for your forbearance. I think we finished early because it was set till 5 o'clock, but I hope that you have felt useful to allow the time to elongate before my 4 o'clock because of the important areas we've had to cover. I hope you found the format helpful, useful. Any points you want to make to me directly, you all have my contact information. By all means, do so. Positive or otherwise, happy to hear, because it's about how do we make this ever better. One doesn't know, those watching in, hopefully they've had value out of it, but I continue with my ambition that on behalf of all of us, when viewed nationally, if not otherwise, that Leeds City Region LEP is seen as the most transparent there is in the land, with an open agenda, an open mind, but importantly, a very forward-looking, but also mindful of the journey we've made. So thank you, everybody, for your forbearance. I'm not going to use unprecedented. I'm not going to pivot. I'm not going to say stay safe, stay alert, but more importantly, say I look forward to seeing you all very soon, and perhaps even socially distant, face to face. So thank you, everybody. And as they say,